1990, I just finished the 2nd grade. That night, I read until I fell asleep. The next thing I remember was waking up in the arms of a man that I didn't know. He was running with me, carrying me down the sidewalk.
After being airlifted to the hospital, Jennifer's wound made it impossible for her to speak. There was concern she might never be able to talk again.
To go from an 8-year-old little girl who thought she could sing like Mariah Carey to being silent.
Imagine a story where the main witness to a brutal murder attempt is also the victim, and she's only 8 years old. She was snatched from her bed, attacked, and left to die in a remote field, unable to speak a single word. The monster who did this walked away, certain her silence was guaranteed. But what no one knew was, this little girl would not only survive, but she would also become the key to solving her own cold case, decades later. What do you guys think? Can you imagine finding your own voice while fighting for your life? Grab your coffee. This one is about to change everything.
When she was kidnapped from her own bed. She survived after being attacked and left to die in a field.
Let's take a trip back to the summer of 1990 in the quiet, tight-knit town of Dickinson, Texas. This is where we meet 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett. By all accounts, Jennifer was an absolute ray of sunshine.
She was the bravest little girl I'd ever met.
She was radiant, insanely curious about how the world worked, and constantly buzzing with energy. If you walked into their small ground floor apartment, you'd probably hear her wandering the halls, belting out songs at the top of her lungs, dreaming of becoming the next Mariah Carey. She lived with her single mother, Elaine. Their bond was incredibly tight. They weren't just mother and daughter, they were best friends. It was truly just the two of them against the world. But despite her bright and bubbly personality, Jennifer carried a heavy, paralyzing burden and extreme, deep-rooted fear of the dark. Like many kids her age, she firmly believed that the second the lights went out, the monsters in the closet and the chilling shadows under the bed came to life. Because of this terrifying anxiety, her ultimate safe haven was right beside her mom. Almost every single night, Jennifer would curl up in Elaine's bed to find comfort and protection. But the night of August 9th, 1990, was different. It was a muggy Texas evening, and Jennifer was incredibly restless. She had spent the day playing outside and was covered in itchy mosquito bites, tossing, turning, and accidentally keeping her mom awake. Elaine, who was working multiple jobs to keep a roof over their heads, had an excruciatingly early shift the next morning. Completely exhausted, she made a very normal, totally reasonable parenting decision. She gently asked Jennifer if, just for this one night, she could go sleep in her own bedroom. Being the sweet kid she was, Jennifer agreed. She gathered her things, walked down the hall, and flipped on the giant overhead light in her room, making it as bright as daytime to keep the shadows at bay. To soothe her anxiety, she grabbed her little piggy bank, broke it open, and dumped the coins on her mattress. Picture this incredibly peaceful, innocent scene. An 8-year-old girl sitting under the bright lights, quietly counting her pennies and nickels, over and over, just trying to distract herself until her heavy eyelids finally fluttered shut. She fell asleep surrounded by her books and her little pile of change. The next morning, the sun rose, and Elaine woke up to get ready for work. She walked over to her daughter's room to wake her, but the bed was completely empty. The sheets were cold. Panic instantly set in as Elaine's eyes darted around the room and landed on a horrifying sight. The bedroom window, the one leading directly out into the apartment complex's dark parking lot, was wide open. The screen was missing. There were no signs of a struggle. No one had heard a single scream. She had just vanished into thin air. The Dickinson police arrived at the scene with sirens blaring, initially hoping this was just a simple case of a child wandering off. Little did they know, the darkness lurking just outside that open window wasn't just the ordinary, empty night sky. It was a real, breathing monster who had been patiently waiting in the shadows, ready to swallow this little girl whole. Let's rewind the clock to the dead of night, just hours before Elaine found that empty bed. Jennifer is sound asleep under the safety of her bright overhead light.
I'm of 1990, I just finished the 2nd grade. That night, I read until I fell asleep. The next thing I remember was waking up in the arms of a man that I didn't know. He was running with me, carrying me down the sidewalk.
Suddenly, she feels this jarring, disorienting motion. She opens her eyes, expecting to see her familiar bedroom walls, but instead, she realizes she is outside in the thick, suffocating night air. She's being carried rapidly down the sidewalk in the arms of a complete stranger. Pure panic sets in. She opens her mouth to let out a blood-curdling scream for her mom, but instantly, a massive, rough hand clamps down hard over her nose and mouth, violently silencing her before she can even make a sound. He throws her into his car, but not in the passenger seat. He forces this tiny, terrified 8-year-old girl to sit directly on his lap, trapping her against the steering wheel as he speeds away into the dark. As she's thrashing around, paralyzed with fear, he leans in and whispers something incredibly manipulative. He tells her to calm down, claiming he's an undercover police officer, and that everything is going to be all right. I gotta be honest with you, thinking about this specific detail just absolutely breaks my heart. Imagine being an innocent 8-year-old kid. On one hand, every single survival instinct in your body is screaming that this man is a monster, that you are in grave danger. But on the other hand, society, your teachers, your parents, they all drill it into your head that police officers are the good guys. They are the ones who protect you. Her young brain was desperately trying to rationalize this nightmare, caught in this agonizing tug of war between trusting a figure of authority and her own terrifying reality. To play along with his sick charade and keep her quiet, he pulls the car into the parking lot of her actual elementary school. It's a place she knows, a place of safety. He points up at the night sky and tells her to just keep looking at the moon, promising that when the moon goes down, her mom is going to pull into the lot to take her home. So, Jennifer sits there in the dark, obediently staring at the sky, desperately waiting for a pair of headlights that will never come. Meanwhile, this so-called cop is chain-smoking Marlboro cigarettes, tossing back cans of Bud Light, and casually offering her pieces of candy. Does this seem weird to you? I mean, seriously, what kind of undercover police officer sits in a pitch-black school parking lot, drinking beer, chain-smoking, and offering an 8-year-old girl candy in the middle of the night? Jennifer's gut intuition was absolutely right. The red flags were everywhere. This is where the story takes a dark turn. After what feels like an eternity of waiting, he crushes a beer can, looks at her, and coldly drops the act. Well, your mom isn't coming.
The man drove her to a dead-end road not far from her home in Dickinson, Texas.
He throws the car into drive and heads to the outskirts of town, finally pulling down a desolate, gravel dead-end road flanked by a massive field of overgrown weeds. But Jennifer, showing an unbelievable amount of grit and intelligence for a child, decides she's done playing his game. She shifts on the seat, looks this monster dead in the eye, and sharply interrogates him. If you're really a cop, where is your badge and your gun?
I was a very curious 8-year-old little girl and would ask a lot of questions. So I started to ask him, well, if you're a police officer, where's your gun? Where's your badge? Prove this to me. At one point, he told me that his gun was in the back seat. So I stood up on the front bucket seat of the car to look into the back. And whenever I did that, to try to see where his gun was located, he ripped my panties off of me. He then laid me down in the front seat of the vehicle.
When Jennifer asked him that sharp question, the sick game he was playing completely evaporated. He coldly told her his gun was in the back seat, and the second she instinctively stood up on the bucket seat to look behind her, the absolute worst of humanity unleashed itself. The details of what happened next are horrifyingly brutal, almost too much to even process. This monster stripped the innocent 8-year-old girl down, held a cold pocket knife to her throat, and leaned in with a question that makes my blood run cold just thinking about it. Am I scaring you, little girl? Am I scaring you? He proceeded to violently assault her, but he didn't stop there. He wrapped his massive hands around her tiny neck and squeezed with everything he had, strangling her at least 4 separate times. The force he used was so vicious that the blood vessels in both of her eyes completely burst. He even tried multiple times to snap her neck. Eventually, The pain and the lack of oxygen took over, and Jennifer blacked out into the darkness she had always been so afraid of.
I woke up to him dragging me by my ankles, and he dropped my legs. I realized I couldn't scream, and I couldn't figure out why. I had just enough strength to throw my right hand on top of my neck, and that's when I felt this gaping wound.
And so afraid of. When she slowly drifted back into consciousness, her reality had shifted into a nightmare that felt like a horror movie. She was no longer in the car. She could feel jagged rocks, sharp twigs, and rough dirt scraping across her bare back. She was outside, completely naked, and this man was dragging her by her ankles through a massive, overgrown field in the pitch black.
I was just left to die in a field.
But this is where Jennifer's unbelievable survival instinct kicks in. Even at 8 years old, her brain processed a chilling realization. If this man knew she was still alive, he would finish what he started. So, she made a split-second decision that is hard for even adults to fathom. She played dead. She went completely limp, turning her body into dead weight, and didn't make a single sound. Her plan worked. Believing he had successfully murdered his victim, he dropped her legs onto a mound of dirt and simply walked away. As she lay there, listening to the crunch of his boots fading into the distance and the slam of a car door, she tried to call out for help. But something was terribly wrong. She opened her mouth to scream, but not a single sound came out. Gathering every last ounce of strength she had left, she reached her right hand up to her neck to figure out why she couldn't speak. Her hand met a gaping, warm wound, and when she pulled it away, it was completely drenched in blood. The horrifying truth is, he didn't just drop her on a mound of dirt, he dumped her directly onto a massive, swarming fire ant hill. Before he left, he had taken that pocket knife and slashed her throat from ear to ear, slicing so deeply that he completely severed her vocal cords. He left an 8-year-old girl to bleed to death in the dirt, assuming that slashing her throat would silence her forever. But he was dead wrong. What happened over the next 12 to 14 hours is nothing short of a medical miracle. As she lay there bleeding out, drifting in and out of consciousness, thousands of fire ants began swarming and aggressively biting her entire body. Now, if you've ever been bitten by a fire ant, you know the pain is excruciating. But for Jennifer, those painful bites were her lifeline. Every time she started to slip into a fatal coma, the searing pain of the venom would shock her system and jolt her awake. Even more incredibly, the combination of the ant venom and a light, misty rain that began to fall actually helped congeal the blood pouring from her neck, essentially clotting the wound and keeping her from bleeding to death. She lay there, paralyzed and voiceless, watching the sun come up and hearing cars pass by in the distance, until late that afternoon, when a group of kids playing hide and seek in the field stumbled upon her bloody body. After being rushed via life flight to the hospital, Jennifer underwent extensive, grueling emergency surgeries. Miraculously, the doctors managed to save her life and stabilize her breathing. But when she finally woke up in the pediatric ICU, the nightmare was far from over. In fact, a whole new kind of psychological terror set in. Whenever a male doctor or a male police officer walked into her room, even the officers, specifically assigned to guard her door and keep her safe, Jennifer would spiral into a state of absolute, sheer panic. She thrashed around hyperventilated, and at one point, she even kicked a male doctor in the stomach just to get him away from her. The investigators were initially confused, but when you look at it from her perspective, it made perfect, horrifying sense. The monster who abducted her, assaulted her, and slit her throat had explicitly told her he was a police officer. In the mind of a traumatized 8-year-old, any man walking into that hospital room could be him, coming back in disguise to finish the job. This presented a massive hurdle for the Dickinson Police Department. They had their sole surviving witness, but she was absolutely terrified of them, and physically, she couldn't utter a single syllable. Her vocal cords were severed, so they had to adapt. The male detective stood outside in the hallway while Jennifer's mother, Elaine, sat by her bedside, gently passing a notebook and pen back and forth. Through messy, Handwritten notes, this little girl began to completely blow the minds of the investigators. She didn't just write down that she was scared. She wrote down hardcore, actionable evidence. She noted the dent on the side of his car. She wrote about the empty Bud Light cans on the floorboard and the specific brand of Marlboro cigarettes he chain smoked. She described his greasy hair, his glasses, a distinct scar on his face, and his black mustache. And then, she scribbled down the most crucial, chilling detail of all. You said his name was Dennis. Using these notes and communicating through simple nods and head shakes, Jennifer worked with a forensic sketch artist to produce an incredibly detailed composite drawing of the suspect. What struck me the most was this little girl's chilling, razor-sharp ability to memorize every single microscopic detail of her attacker, while she was literally bleeding to death. It's a level of presence and survival instinct that most adults don't even possess. And her fighting spirit didn't stop there. Doctors had gravely warned Elaine that because of the severe damage to her throat, Jennifer would likely never speak.
I remember wanting a chocolate bar from the gift shop and being told no. And trying to call for one of my uncles to get me my chocolate bar. In the process of my frustration and trying to say my uncle's name, a sound came out. And it was just like the world stopped for a moment. I proved everyone wrong.
Again. But about 2 weeks into her recovery, she was craving a chocolate bar from the hospital gift shop. Elaine, being a responsible mom, told her no. Frustrated and refusing to take no for an answer, Jennifer tried to bypass her mom and get her uncle's attention to buy it for her. Pushed by pure, stubborn 8-year-old frustration, she pushed air through her damaged throat, and a tiny, raspy squeak escaped her lips. The whole room stopped. She had just shattered every medical prognosis they gave her. But despite her slowly returning voice, her incredible bravery, and a sketch that was plastered all over town, the tragic reality of 1990 set in. DNA profiling technology was still in its absolute infancy. With no immediate matches and no solid leads, the tips stopped coming in. The investigation hit a massive brick wall, and the case slowly, agonizingly went ice cold. As the years dragged on, the tiny town of Dickinson slowly tried to move forward, but for Jennifer, time was essentially frozen in 1990. Growing up, she had to navigate the agonizing reality of being a survivor of an unspeakable crime. She lived with a permanent, visible scar sliced across her throat, a daily, brutal reminder of the monster who tried to silence her. The trauma was suffocating. She struggled with an intense fear of the dark and a deep-rooted, paralyzing terror of men. But despite the heavy psychological toll, Jennifer flat-out refused to let this predator break her spirit. She didn't just hide away. She spent the next 18 years on a relentless, quiet hunt. Every time she walked down the street, sat in a classroom, or went to the grocery store, her eyes were scanning the crowds. She was constantly looking for the greasy hair, the glasses, the black mustache. She was looking for the man named Dennis. She managed to graduate college, became a children's librarian, and even found deep healing when she fell in love with a man named Jonathan. But the cold case file sitting in the Dickinson Police Department constantly gnawed at her. She needed justice. By 2008, nearly 2 decades had passed without a single solid lead. The original investigators had moved on, and the trail was completely ice cold. But then, a massive turning point breathed life back into the investigation. A deeply dedicated investigator named Detective Tim Cromie took over the cold case, teaming up with FBI Special Agent Richard Renison. When Cromie sat down face-to-face with an adult Jennifer, he made her a promise that shifted the entire trajectory of her life. He looked her in the eye and swore he would do everything in his power, up until the very last day of his career, to catch the man who did this to her. And Cromie wasn't making empty promises. The DNA profiling technology that was practically non-existent back in 1990 had evolved into a razor-sharp, state-of-the-art weapon by 2008. Cromie and Renison went straight into the evidence vault. They pulled out a discarded men's t-shirt and a pair of cut-up underwear that had been found tossed in a ditch just a quarter mile from the field where Jennifer was left to die. They shipped those aging items straight to the FBI crime lab, praying that some microscopic trace of the attacker's DNA had survived the last 18 years. The testing process was agonizingly slow. For an entire year, there was nothing but dead silence. It felt like the case was hitting another brick wall, and then everything changed when, in September 2009, Detective Cromie's phone finally rang. It was the FBI DNA lab. They had run the extracted profile through CODIS, the national database, and they got a direct, undeniable match. The name on the forensic report, Dennis Earl Bradford. Let that sink in for a second. The exact same name that an 8-year-old girl, bleeding out and unable to speak, had scribbled down on a hospital notepad 19 years prior. This monster was so arrogant, so absolutely certain that this little girl was going to die on that fire ant hill, that he didn't even bother to give her a fake name.
You ever heard the name Jennifer Schuett?
Yes.
Did you ever have occasion to come in contact with her?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
No. My whole life for the past 20 years has been utterly and completely because of my mistake.
I can tell, obviously, it's that's your life, but I think you would, if you were to see her, I think you would be extremely proud of her. I really do.
Oh, thank you. She's alive.
Yes, she's alive.
She don't.
She's alive. You want me to tell you she's alive?
When the FBI finally put a face to the DNA, the sheer horror of the situation set in. Dennis Earl Bradford wasn't some random drifter passing through town. Back in 1990, he lived less than a quarter mile, barely 400 meters away from Jennifer's apartment. He was a monster hiding in plain sight, practically sharing her backyard, and his criminal record proved he was a habitual predator. In 1996, he was convicted of kidnapping a woman from a bar, choking her, and holding a knife to her throat. A sick, twisted memo that perfectly mirrored what he did to Jennifer. He was sentenced to 12 years but had recently been released. But the real jaw-dropping moment for the investigators came when they pulled his 1990 Arkansas's driver's license. When they placed his official photo right next to the forensic sketch that an 8-year-old, voiceless Jennifer had helped create, it was identical. The glasses, the greasy hair, the black mustache, it was a perfect, terrifying match. On October 13, 2009, law enforcement swooped in and arrested the 40-year-old Bradford at his home in Arkansas. They dragged him into an interrogation room, and at first, he played it cool. He admitted he knew of the case, but when pressed, he coldly told the detectives, "You did your homework." He was arrogant. He thought he had literally gotten away with murder. The chilling reality finally came to light when the FBI agents leaned across the table and dropped the ultimate bombshell. Jennifer Schuett didn't die on that ant hill. She survived, she thrived, and her voice was the exact reason he was currently in handcuffs. Hearing that his victim was alive completely shattered him. He broke down sobbing like a child. According to the official FBI interrogation transcripts, Bradford finally confessed to the unimaginable. "I pulled that little girl out of the window, and I put her in my car," he cried. "She was freaking out, and I told her, 'Please don't worry.' I told her I was a police officer and everything would be all right." Then, describing the attack, he stated, "I lost it. I was like a savage animal. I took that little girl out there and I raped her and I cut her throat. I don't know why. Many times I just wanted to end it, but I never had the guts." Bradford was extradited to the Galveston County Jail and immediately placed on a strict suicide watch. Meanwhile, Jennifer spent endless, sleepless nights agonizing over her victim impact statement, meticulously preparing for the trial set for August 10, 2010, exactly 20 years to the day of her attack. She was finally going to look the devil in the eye and tell him he failed. But Bradford was the ultimate coward. In May 2010, shortly after medical evaluations allowed his suicide watch to be lifted, he used his bedsheets to hang himself in his prison cell. He took his own life specifically to avoid facing a judge, a jury, and most importantly, the powerful woman he had tried to break. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done? Can you even begin to imagine the suffocating anger and frustration? How would you feel if the monster who destroyed your childhood took his own life, just to escape facing the consequences of his actions? The injustice of that moment is absolutely agonizing. Even though the trial was ripped away from her, Jennifer flat out refused to let this coward have the final word. He had stolen her childhood, her sense of safety, and her voice, but she was not about to let him steal her closure. On August 10, 2010, the exact day her trial was supposed to begin, marking exactly 20 years since the attack, Jennifer and her husband, Jonathan, drove to the cemetery where Dennis Bradford was buried. She stood tall over the fresh grave of the monster who tried to end her life, looked down, and read her victim impact statement out loud. Her words were sharp and unyielding. Dennis Bradford, you chose the wrong 45-pound, 8-year-old girl to try and murder. Because for 19 years, I have thought of you every single day, and helped in searching for you. Listening to my heart all of these years and never giving up on finding you, I was right. And then, something incredibly profound happened. Right after she finished reading, she turned to her husband and asked if he thought Dennis could hear her. At that exact moment, she felt a sharp pinch on her leg. She looked down and saw that she had just been bitten by a fire ant. Out of everywhere she could have stood in that precise second, she was bitten by the exact same type of ant that had kept her conscious and saved her life in that dark field 2 decades earlier. To Jennifer, it was the ultimate spiritual sign that the loop had finally been closed. And her victories didn't stop at the cemetery. Because of the horrific nature of the physical trauma she endured as a child, doctors had heartbreakingly diagnosed her with severe complications, telling her it would be nearly impossible for her to ever conceive a child naturally. But after her story went public, a deeply moved fertility specialist stepped forward and offered to help her with IVF. Defying the odds once again, Jennifer gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Jenna, and later, a son named Jonah. Today, she travels the country as a fierce, vocal advocate for survivors of violent crimes. She proudly declares that she is no longer a victim. She is victorious. I gotta be honest with you, when I really sit back and look at this entire case, the thing that haunts me the most isn't the cold-blooded depravity of Dennis Bradford. It's the sheer, unbreakable titanium will of a little girl. At an age where kids are just learning to tie their shoes, Jennifer utilized extreme survival tactics, memorized microscopic details while bleeding to death, and ultimately led the FBI right to her attacker's front door. She is living proof that no one can ever permanently silence your voice, unless you allow them to. What do you guys think really happened in those final moments when Dennis Bradford tied that bedsheet in his cell? Was it the crushing, unbearable weight of genuine remorse, or was it just the ultimate, pathetic act of a coward who was terrified of facing the little girl he couldn't break? Let me know down below in the comments. I really want to read your thoughts on this one. I gotta be honest, I'll keep you posted if I find anything new. Thanks so much for watching and for all your comments. Appreciate you guys.